Good evening, everybody. Tonight, I have the pleasure of welcoming back Quentin Lewis, who's a retired electrical engineer. Welcome, Quentin.
Good evening, Clive. Good to see you.
So, we're talking about investments generally, and Quentin has been an investor for some time as well, maybe starting a little later than I did. I started around 50 odd years ago. Quentin, do you want to tell us a little bit about how you feel about investments and when you started?
Well, um, I guess I didn't. My main investment journey sort of started as a just as a saver, I guess, and when I began to work, I had a 401k at that time and an IRA, and as a child, I knew I had to. I didn't know I had to be a saver, but I was sort of taught and exposed to the idea of saving anyway. So once I started to work, I knew it was important to put money away, and so I put money away, and then I tried to decide what am I going to do in these savings with these savings, and anyway, so that's when my journey started. Probably in my well, I mean, it started before that when I would put money into the bank, but I wasn't investing per se. I was just saving. But yeah, once I got a 401k, I'd say that's which was probably in 1980, I guess, or whenever 401k started. It was my first job, second
And,
job.
and, and when did you buy your first equities? How old would you have been?
Well, I think when I was in, how old would I have been? I don't know, 25, 25 or, I mean, I don't recall exactly how, I mean, basically with 401ks at that time, we were stuck with buying funds. And the company way back then would only allow certain funds to be purchased. And at that point, I didn't really know how to value anything, but they would try to give you an explanation for which ones were more risky, less risky, more growth, less growth, what areas of, they gave you a good prospectus, but I didn't really understand the market or anything at that point. So the first time I actually bought an equity myself was probably when I went to work at Sun, which was I don't remember 1987, I guess. Yeah, 1987, and in their 401k they gave us it was actually a Fidelity account, and they gave us a thing called I forget what it was called, but basically it allowed they trusted us for some reason. Uh, the Fidelity account, they enabled a brokerage link, that's what it was called, brokerage link, which allowed us to buy stocks. So at that point, I was not so much tired of funds, but I thought I was fascinated by stocks, and I don't remember the first stock I bought. I mean, obviously, the first stock I had was like company stock that I got as an option, but anyways, besides that, that's when I first started. I guess it would be 1987. Yeah, maybe it was a couple of years after I started, but yeah, that's Sun.
I bought my first stock at the age of 18.
Mm.
I'd been following I suppose not following the stock market. That's wrong to say. My granddad had a portfolio, and he once showed me in a little exercise book how he wrote down the share prices every day and calculated the net worth of his five or six shares.
Mm.
And it was fascinating for me to see that every single day his portfolio value changed and the value of each share changed and the price changed. And I said, as soon as I get to 18, I'm going to do this. So that's actually what I did. As soon as I could possibly do it at the age of 18, I did that. It wasn't very easy back then because hearsay was that stock market was a privilege for the riches and you had to be invited to be a client.
Mm.
But as apparently stockbrokers were no longer taking on clients, or so they said, I ended up writing to the London Stock Exchange,
Mm.
and they wrote back and said, here's the names of three brokers who are still taking clients.
Interesting. Yeah.
And I rang I had no idea what I was doing, but I had £550 or thereabouts. And I rang the broker and asked him what I could invest in. And he gave me the name of a company which ostensibly had just found an oil field. I think it was called Eglinton Oil, an Irish company, and they'd found oil in Venezuela, and apparently it was the largest oil field in the world. And 1975 was, the oil crisis era, Suez crisis. We had all these crises going on, which meant that oil prices were rocketing. So it was a bit like the dot-com bubble, where every company which flooded the stock market seemed to be a new oil company. So, like a fool, I followed his advice without inquiring further. Not that you could have inquired further, because there's nothing to inquire into those days. There was no internet.
Right.
And I bought 1,000 shares at 55p, and then I watched them day after day for a year and a half until I called back the broker and said, I've been looking for this news about the oil field and never seen it.
Yeah.
And he said, and the price was by then 35p. And he said to me, "Oh, I'm really sorry, Mr. Thompson. What I told you was what the directors had told me when
Uh,
you bought them. But I then heard that they found water, or there was some water, and it didn't work. But
uh,
I got some information. Apparently, there's oil under the water if you want to buy some more on the cheap." I
oh,
said,
jeez.
but I
Of
said, but
course.
I've got no more money. I've got no money.
Yeah.
So, so that didn't work. But I watched these shares for a number of years, and
Right.
little by little they edged downwards. The occasional little rally, and they finally expired. In those days, they used to quote prices at one quarter, one half, 1/60. So they expired at 1/32 of a
Oh.
penny,
Oh,
and
jeez.
then they vanished. I could never find out what happened to them because with no internet, and there was no idea where the address of the company was. I mean, I know it was Ireland, but that's all I knew. You couldn't
Right.
write to this, and if they just vanished. So
Wow. Yeah. Yeah. So unbeknownst to me, my dad actually had some shares in some companies, and he was. I'm not sure exactly. Again, he never told me about this. He never. I think it was his. We never talked about stocks and bonds um, like that, and I think this was sort of probably towards the end of his life. And the only reason I knew that he had them was when he passed away. I went through his papers and I found these stock certificates. Now, when I found them, they were worthless. I mean, I thought, oh, great, look at this company. I Googled it and it like showed a name of a company, but they had been bought and basically gone. Well, they didn't get bought. They went out of business and somebody swept up their whatever was left of their assets. But anyway, but again, if I looked at the way he invested, and again, he didn't talk to me about it. It was more of a speculation. I think this was he was not an investor. He was an instructor. Actually, he was in the Navy for a number of years, and he was a machinist. And then he got a degree in physics and became a professor. But he wasn't knowledgeable really about the market, I would say, and so I didn't learn from him that way. My interest in stocks specifically, as opposed to just funds and just being a saver, came. I think I mentioned it when we spoke last, when I had company stocks at Sun, and I was told, this is you might want to diversify or take some off the table, is what they said. And at that point, and then after the .com, anyway, so I did have a few stocks here and there at that point, but at that point I did sell some. As I said, I bought a house and stuff, but that the idea of getting more diversified than just what I had came to mind big time when the .com crash happened. Um, I didn't lose a lot of money in the .com crash because, like I said, I sold a lot of stock to buy a house, but that was the wake up call that gee, I didn't get scared like, oh, this is not something I want to delve into. What I said to myself is I got to learn a lot more about what's going on here, and that basically started my journey. I mean, my journey started at a very young age when I was taught to save, but in terms of trying to learn about the markets, which I wouldn't say I'm any sort of expert, but that's when it started. When I decided, I don't know what I'm doing here. You know what I mean? Some of my friends lost a lot of money, and and I better not screw around. I got to learn something here. So yeah.
So your dad didn't tell you about investments at all, and you didn't have the benefit of knowing about them.
No.
What about your children? What about educating children generally? Do you think this is something that parents should do?
Oh yeah. So I thought about this. I do. I do. I do. I mean, the way. So I, I think you got to. I think yes, I do. And if you, how do I say this? I think parents should educate the kids about everything that they have from life experience and from education knowledge and so on and so forth. Um, but a lot of people are not going to have the sort of experience that you certainly do and that I do now, necessarily earlier in their life. And so, but yes, if your parents or if you have that knowledge, I mean, I guess what I'm saying is you should probably try to, um, well, instill whatever knowledge you have about I think everybody should have a knowledge of savings, and so to me, that's the biggest thing to impart into a kid is the idea of what is money, what what does it represent, the value of saving, and then, anyways, that's basically what I think. But sure, if you have the knowledge, if you came down, you know, if your parents or if whatever, if you however you came to it, you have this kind of knowledge about stock and investing, and it isn't always we're talking about stock, but a lot of my late wife family was sort of into real estate. I mean, they didn't rent, but they were builders. So you know what I mean. There are all kinds of ways to gain value. I think of it in terms of investing in stock and companies and bonds and what have you. But I also have some real estate and stuff like that for that reason as well. So that's the other thing. I think it's a little bit more sometimes than just stocks and bonds. Yeah.